James, stop the car. Stop it right now. I didn't wait for my driver to hit the brakes. I flung the door of my Maybach open while it was still moving. My $3,000 heels hit the oily slush of Times Square, but I didn't feel the cold. My eyes were locked on a woman in rags, her face smeared with city soot, holding a stack of damp newspapers. As I approached her, the world stopped. Those emerald green eyes, the same eyes I see in the mirror every morning, looked at me with a terror that shattered my soul. "Mother," I whispered, my voice breaking through the roar of New York City. The woman froze. She dropped her newspapers into a muddy puddle and turned to run. "No, you have the wrong person," she sobbed. I grabbed her hand, the cold, shaking hand that had left me on a doorstep 10 years ago. 10 years, Mother. You left me to starve, and now I find you begging on the streets I own? You are not walking away again. Before we find out why a mother would leave her daughter only to become a beggar in the same city, welcome to Scarred But Pure. We tell the stories the world tries to hide, stories of pain, justice, and the strength of the human spirit. If you believe that every scar has a story, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. We have a powerful journey ahead. And I want to know who is riding with us today. What city are you watching from? Drop your city and country in the comments below. I'll be hearting my favorite responses. The silence inside the Sterling Tower was suffocating. I stood by the window of my penthouse office, looking down at Manhattan as if I owned the world. And on paper I did. I was Adriana Sterling, the CEO of the largest tech empire in the country. I had built this fortress of glass and steel to protect myself from the memory of a cold night 10 years ago, the night my mother vanished, leaving me with nothing but a dying grandmother and a heart full of lead. My grandmother, May, did her best. She worked 3 jobs just to buy me bread. I watched her hands grow gnarled and her back grow bent until the day she finally closed her eyes for the last time. On her deathbed, she whispered, "Don't hate her, Adriana. She was just broken." But I did hate her. I used that hate as fuel. Every time I was hungry, I studied harder. Every time someone mocked my second-hand clothes, I worked faster. I climbed the corporate ladder with a ferocity that terrified my rivals. I became a machine, a billionaire with a heart of stone. But today, the stone cracked. "James," I said, my voice barely a whisper as we drove back to my estate. My mother was sitting in the back seat, huddled against the door as if the Italian leather seats were burning her skin. She smelled of old rain and despair. "Yes, Ms. Sterling?" James asked, his eyes meeting mine in the rear-view mirror. He was confused. He had never seen me like this. "Cancel the board meeting with the investors. Cancel the merger launch. Tell them I had a family emergency." The woman beside me let out a choked sob. "Adriana, please. Just let me out at the next corner. I don't belong in your world. I'm a ghost. Look at me. I'm a beggar." I turned to her, my eyes blazing with a decade of suppressed fury. "You don't belong? You made me this person. You left me so I would have a better life, right? Well, look at me. I'm the Queen of New York. I have the palace, I have the crown, but I haven't slept a full night in 10 years because I was wondering where you were." We pulled into the gates of my Upper East Side mansion. The security guards bowed as we passed. My mother stared at the marble fountains and the lush gardens with wide, hollow eyes. "You did this for me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "No," I hissed, stepping out of the car. "I did this to prove I didn't need you. But now that I've found you, you're going to stay here. You're going to live in the luxury you threw away. And you're going to tell me every single detail of why you left." As I led her into the grand foyer, my head maid, Elena, gasped. She looked at my mother's filthy rags with disgust. "Ms. Sterling? Who is this person? Shall I call security?" I felt a surge of protectiveness I hadn't felt since I was a child. I stepped in front of my mother and looked Elena dead in the eye. "This person is the guest of honor. You will prepare the master guest suite. You will call the finest doctor in the city. And if I hear a single word of disrespect toward her, you will be on the street before sunset. Is that understood?" Elena bowed her head, trembling. "Yes, ma'am." I walked my mother up the grand staircase. Her footsteps left muddy streaks on the white silk carpet. I didn't care. For the first time in 10 years, the penthouse didn't feel empty. It felt like a battlefield. I opened the doors to a suite that was larger than the entire house I grew up in. Bathe. Eat. Sleep. Tomorrow, the interrogation begins. I walked out and slammed the door. My heart was thumping so hard I thought it would break my ribs. I went to my own room, poured a glass of scotch, and threw it against the wall. She was back. The woman who broke me was under my roof. And as the rain lashed against the windows of my empire, I realized that I didn't know if I wanted to save her, or make her feel every ounce of the pain she gave me. The morning in the Upper East Side was silent, but for Adriana Sterling, the silence was just the eye of the storm. She stood before the closed doors of the master guest suite, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. Inside that room lay the woman who had shattered her world 10 years ago, now sleeping on silk sheets that cost more than their entire childhood home. "Miss Sterling, the doctor has finished examining your mother." James's voice broke the heavy silence. Adriana turned, her face instantly shifting back into a mask of cold iron. "What's the verdict?" "Chronic malnutrition, Adriana. Her lungs are weak from years of breathing in city smog and sleeping in the freezing cold. But what's most concerning isn't her physical health." James hesitated. "She kept whispering your name in her sleep. She's terrified, as if she doesn't believe she's allowed to be here." Adriana stepped into the room. Her mother, Mary, looked fragile in the middle of the massive bed. Her face, now cleaned of city soot, revealed deep lines of agony and premature aging. Adriana sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her mother's hands, rough, calloused, and covered in small scars from handling thousands of abrasive newspapers. "Why, Mother?" Adriana whispered. "Why New York? If you wanted to leave, why stay in the same city as me for 10 years? Suddenly, Mary's eyes snapped open. She gasped, flinching away from Adriana, trying to hide her hands as if she feared her filth would stain her daughter's skin. "Adriana, I have to go. People will see you with me. They'll find out the CEO of Sterling Tower is the daughter of a beggar." Mary's voice was a dry, desperate wheeze. "Sit down," Adriana commanded, her voice vibrating with authority. "You aren't going anywhere until you explain yourself. You said you left so I'd have a better life. You left me with Grandma May when she couldn't even afford to keep the lights on. Is that what you call a plan?" Mary looked down, tears splashing onto the expensive duvet. "Your grandmother," she agreed. "We made a deal. I owed a lot of money to some very dangerous people when your father disappeared. If I had stayed, they would have killed you too. I ran so they would only hunt me. I became a ghost on the streets so they'd lose your trail while you grew up safe." Adriana's heart hammered against her ribs. This truth felt like a physical blow. For 10 years, she had fueled her empire with hatred, thinking her mother was selfish. But her mother had been living like an animal in the shadows, just to keep her alive. "But you could have come back. I've been a millionaire for 5 years." Adriana roared. "And ruin everything you built?" Mary shook her head weakly. "I saw you on the news, Adriana. You looked so powerful. Sometimes, I stood across the street from Sterling Tower just to watch your car drive by. That was enough for me. Seeing you succeed was the only reason I kept breathing on those cold sidewalks." Adriana felt her world spinning. The fortress of hate she had built for a decade was crumbling. But outside those mansion walls, a different storm was brewing. James walked back in, his face pale as he held up a tablet. "Adriana, we have a crisis at the office. Someone leaked the photos of you in Times Square yesterday. The images of you hugging a homeless woman are everywhere. Social media is exploding. The investors are questioning your emotional stability, and the board of directors has called an emergency meeting, without you." Adriana stood up, her eyes flashing with a dangerous fire. Who leaked it? Marcus, James replied. Marcus was the vice CEO, a man who had been waiting for Adriana to stumble. He's calling it the Sterling slum scandal. He's trying to move for a vote of no confidence. Adriana looked at her mother, then at James. They think humanity is a weakness? They think loving my mother is a scandal. She turned back to Mary. Rest, mother. James, put guards at this door. No one goes in or out. Adriana walked out, her heels echoing like gunfire on the marble floor. She wasn't that crying little girl on her grandmother's porch anymore. She was a lioness. James, get the chopper ready. We're going to the office now. And call the best PR team in the country. We aren't going to deny the story. We're going to turn it into a weapon. As the helicopter lifted off towards the Manhattan skyline, Adriana looked down at the city she conquered. Marcus thought he could use her heart to destroy her. He was about to find out that a mother's love wasn't a liability, it was the most dangerous force in New York. The glass doors of the Sterling Tower conference room swung open with a violence that made the air vibrate. Adriana Sterling didn't walk into the room, she invaded it. Her black silk suit was sharp enough to cut glass, and her eyes held a predatory glint that made the 12 men at the table drop their gazes instantly. At the head of the table sat Marcus Thorne, the vice CEO. He was smirking, holding a glass of expensive scotch, looking like a man who had already won. On the massive screens behind him, the grainy photo of Adriana hugging her homeless mother in Times Square was frozen, titled, The Sterling Slum Scandal, Is Our CEO Unstable? Adriana, Marcus said, his voice dripping with fake concern. We didn't expect you. Given your emotional state, we thought you'd be busy at the shelter. The room chuckled nervously. Adriana didn't say a word. She walked to her seat, her heels clicking like a death toll. She sat down, leaned back, and looked Marcus dead in the eye. The silence stretched for 10, 20, 30 seconds until the smirk on Marcus's face began to wither. Marcus, Adriana finally spoke, her voice a low, dangerous purr. You've spent the last 24 hours trying to convince this board that my mother's poverty is a liability for this company. You've leaked private photos, you've manipulated the stock price, and you've called me unstable. She stood up slowly, leaning over the table. But here's what you forgot. I am a Sterling. We don't run from the mud. We own the ground it's made of. Adriana, look at the press. Marcus barked, gesturing to the screens. The investors are terrified. They don't want a CEO whose mother sells newspapers on the street. Wrong, Adriana hissed. The investors don't want a CEO who is a traitor. James, show them the real scandal. James, standing at the door, tapped his tablet. The screen behind Marcus flickered. The photo of the mother vanished, replaced by a series of encrypted bank transfers. Marcus's face went from pale to ghostly white in a heartbeat. These are records of Marcus Thorne funneling millions of company dollars into offshore accounts for the past 3 years, Adriana announced, her voice echoing through the hall. He wasn't worried about my stability. He was worried that if I stayed in power, I'd eventually find the hole in the budget he's been hiding. The board members gasped. The tension in the room snapped. Marcus tried to stand, his hands shaking. That's a lie. Those are forged. And this, Adriana continued, ignoring him, is the security footage from the basement of the Grand Sterling Hotel. 2 nights ago, Marcus met with a local gang leader to ensure that a certain beggar, my mother, was kept away from this building by any means necessary. Adriana slammed her hand on the table, the sound like a gunshot. You didn't just steal from me, Marcus. You tried to hurt the woman who lived in the shadows for 10 years to protect me. You thought her rags were a weakness? No. They are a reminder of a strength you will never understand. She turned to the board. I am launching a $1 billion foundation today. The Mary Sterling Hope Center. We aren't just going to help the homeless, we are going to employ them. Our stock is currently up 12% because the public loves a story of a daughter who doesn't abandon her blood. New York loves a fighter. And I am the best fighter you've ever seen. She leaned in close to Marcus, her breath hot against his cold, sweaty face. The police are in the lobby, Marcus. James will escort you out. And don't worry about your suit. Where you're going, orange is the only color they wear. As security dragged a screaming Marcus out of the room, Adriana stood alone at the head of the table. Her heart was thumping against her ribs, but for the first time in a decade, it wasn't fueled by hate. It was fueled by justice. She walked out of the boardroom, past the stunned employees, and straight to the elevator. She didn't stop until she was back at her estate. She ran up the stairs to her mother's room. Mary was sitting by the window, looking at the gardens. She looked up, fear in her eyes. Adriana? Did I ruin it? Did they take your tower? Adriana dropped to her knees and buried her head in her mother's lap, sobbing like the little girl she used to be. No, Mother. We won. The tower is still standing. But more importantly, you're never going back to that street again. We're going to build a world where no mother has to choose between her life and her daughter's safety. Outside, the New York sun was setting, painting the skyscrapers in gold. The Empire of Stone had finally found its heart. You didn't just run because of debt, did you, Mother? I asked, my voice trembling as I looked at the old photo. My mother, now dressed in silk but still looking frail, stared at the man in the picture. Her face turned as white as a sheet. Adriana, please, don't dig any deeper. He's dangerous. He's the reason I gave up everything to keep you alive. Who is he? I demanded, my heart racing. The man who murdered your father, she whispered. And the man who has been sitting on your board of directors for the last 5 years. The revelation felt like a physical blow. I looked at the photograph again. The man standing next to my late father was Arthur Sterling, my father's own brother. My uncle. The man who had walked me down the aisle of my graduation, the man who had comforted me when I thought my mother had abandoned me. Arthur. I gasped. He told me he tried to find you. He told me he spent millions of dollars on private investigators. He wasn't looking for me to bring me back, Adriana, Mary sobbed, clutching the star-shaped wooden bead on her bracelet. He was looking for me to finish what he started. He forced your father's car off the road 10 years ago. He wanted the empire for himself. He told me if I ever spoke a word, you would be next. I lived in the trash so he would think I was dead. I stayed in the shadows so he would leave you alone. My blood turned to ice. Every hug, every piece of advice, every dinner I had shared with Arthur was a lie. He had turned my mother into a beggar and my father into a memory. James. I screamed, my voice echoing through the mansion. James appeared at the door in seconds. Yes, ma'am. I need every file we have on Arthur's private security firm. And I need the forensic report for my father's accident. Now. As James rushed to comply, I turned to my mother. He thinks he's safe because he thinks you're still a ghost. But tonight, the ghost is coming home to claim what was stolen. That evening, I didn't go to the office. I went to Arthur's private estate in the Hamptons. I didn't call ahead. I wanted to see the look on his face when the past finally caught up to him. When I walked into his study, Arthur was sitting by the fireplace, sipping a glass of wine. Adriana. What a surprise. I heard about the boardroom drama with Marcus. Brave girl. You're just like your father. Don't you dare speak his name, I hissed. Arthur's smile vanished. Excuse me. I stepped into the light, and from the shadows behind me, my mother walked forward. She was no longer in rags, but she still carried the weight of 10 years of suffering in her eyes. Arthur dropped his glass. It shattered on the marble floor, the red wine spreading like a pool of blood. Mary? It can't be. The ghost is back, Arthur, I said, my voice cold and lethal. And she brought receipts. I found the burner phones, the offshore payments to the hitman, and the witness you thought you silenced. Arthur's face morphed from shock to a twisted, dark grin. He stood up, towering over us. You think a couple of pictures and a broken woman can stop me? I built this city. I own the judges. I own the police. But you don't own me, I replied, holding up my phone. And you didn't know that James has been broadcasting this entire conversation live to the FBI and the New York Times. Outside, the sound of sirens began to wail, coming closer and closer. Arthur looked out the window, realized the walls were finally closing in, and collapsed into his chair. I walked over to my mother and wrapped my arm around her. You don't have to hide anymore, Mom. The man who stole your life is going to lose his forever. As the FBI burst through the doors, I looked at the red string bracelet on my mother's wrist. It was dirty, it was frayed, but it was finally home. The war for the Sterling Empire was over. And for the first time in 10 years, the CEO and the beggar were finally free.